All right, so tonight we're going to talk about Alzheimer's, and I think that we probably all know somebody. I think, especially if you're coming from Truvai, if some of you are connected with Truvai, guaranteed you know somebody that's got Alzheimer's disease or dementia of some sort. But tonight we're going to specifically talking about Alzheimer's. Natalie, I think most of you guys know my wife, Natalie. She's joining as well. She's been running Truvai for a few years, and recently Natalie and I became the owners of Truvai, so we're super excited to help people that are dealing with dementia. Again, tonight's more on Alzheimer's, but just to help all kinds of people that are dealing with dementia. And it is a disease that impacts people in a pretty significant way. So a little bit about who I am to get started, because by what authority do I have to speak on dementia? I'm a doctor of chiropractic, and so you don't typically think of a chiropractor working with people with dementia, but a lot of chiropractors go into specialties. And so when I graduated in 2004, was just strictly doing chiropractic. And then over the course of the years, I've really gotten into functional medicine, just trying to figure out and try to help people to prevent illnesses rather than just treating illnesses. And so I've gotten into functional medicine. I went through many courses in functional neurology as well, which is very much focused on functional medicine that's focused on the brain. I'm not sure how many of you guys have heard of Dr. Dale Bredesen, but I'll talk about him in a little bit, but he wrote a book called The End of Alzheimer's and has been working with thousands of Alzheimer's patients so far, and has seen significant improvement in many of the people that at least have early onset Alzheimer's, and even people that have had late stage Alzheimer's, he's seen improvement as well. And so, as I mentioned, I'm married to Natalie. We have 3 kids, and we live in Chaska. So we're very much a part of this community and want to see, really more than anything, we want to see people not end up at Truvai. And so, which is kind of weird to think of, right? You'd think that as owners, we want to be able to take care of the people that are dealing with it, but we'd rather see people not ever have to deal with Alzheimer's. And so that's really what my talk will be about today. I will talk a bit about how someone that's dealing with Alzheimer's can be helped, but more so, I think it's probably more that we can help someone prevent Alzheimer's is probably the biggest thing that we could do for someone. So with that, I want to share a picture of, this is Natalie's grandpa. Like I said, I think we've all probably dealt with someone that's dealing with Alzheimer's or dementia of some sort. Natalie, her grandpa dealt with Alzheimer's. My stepdad's dad dealt with Alzheimer's. So my experience with Alzheimer's, I didn't know him before he had Alzheimer's, so I had no idea what he was like before he had it, but I did get to know Natalie's grandpa before he had Alzheimer's. And here's a guy, a very active guy. When before me and Natalie got married, I actually lived with him and his Natalie's grandma, and he would walk everywhere. He needed to go to the bank, the grocery store, he'd just go for a walk. He lived in Bismarck, North Dakota, was at church every day. He was just very active out in his garden. And I just remember a few years after meeting him, they started talking about that he was showing signs of Alzheimer's. And I thought, how could this guy, so healthy, because he seemed like he was super healthy, how could somebody that was so healthy start developing Alzheimer's disease? Is there something that he could have done? Is it something that he could have prevented? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is that is there things that can be done that can either slow down Alzheimer's or even potentially prevent it altogether? And like I said, we can even talk about seeing some signs of reversing it, although it's a lot easier to work with people that are dealing with preventing it or at least slowing it down. So yeah, he lived for about 10 years, would you say? Yeah, so he lived for about 10 years with Alzheimer's disease. And so again, it was sad to see his life really just taken away those last 10 years because he really couldn't do much. He couldn't go for walks anymore. He was in a nursing home. And I mean, he had great caregivers. He was in some great homes, but still, it would have been nice just to see him live a full life and then have his memory all the way till the time that he passed away. So again, I got you guys all on mute, but as we go through this, if you guys have questions, I gave you guys the opportunity. You guys can unmute yourself. If you do have a question, I will kind of have some breakpoints where we can, where I will answer some questions, but then at the end, I'll try to leave some time where we can ask questions as well. So I think, again, we all know somebody that's got Alzheimer's disease, and I think we all know people that have survived cancer. We know somebody that survived heart disease or a heart attack, but I don't think there's anyone that can say that they know somebody that survived Alzheimer's disease. And so unfortunately, most people that have Alzheimer's disease, that will be the thing that they die from. And so again, there's more and more research being done to help people to actually be cured of Alzheimer's, or again, either prevent it or slow it down. And so I think it's really important, especially right now. I think with all the things going on with COVID and such, I feel like our country has lost hope. And I think when it comes to a disease such as Alzheimer's, we lose hope. And the reason why is, again, because very few people have ever heard that someone's actually survived Alzheimer's disease. And so I'm not about providing false hope to people. If there wasn't hope in this, if there wasn't a way that there's things that can be done to either prevent it, slow it down, and reverse it, then I wouldn't share this with you. But we know based off of research and what's out there being done for people with Alzheimer's right now, that there is actually hope. And my office, that's one of the big things that we're big about. In fact, that's our mission and our vision, is to provide hope to people that have had that hope stripped away. Because I think a lot of people go to the doctor, get a diagnosis, and unfortunately that diagnosis is, it can be very discouraging because they don't present a lot of hope. And that's what tonight I want to do, is I want to present to you that there is hope in this, and there are things that can be done so that you can reverse it, slow it down, prevent it. Okay. So there's lots of different types of dementia. And again, I know at Truvai, you guys deal with a lot of these different types. But so you got vascular, you got Lewy bodies, you got trauma-induced, you got people that have multiple types of dementia: frontotemporal, Creutzfeldt-Jakob, hydrocephalus, Wernicke-Korsakoff. So these are all different types, but the most common type of dementia that you're going to see is Alzheimer's. In fact, a lot of times people just use those interchangeably, that the person has dementia, that they have Alzheimer's. But Alzheimer's is the type of dementia, but it is also the one, it's the most common. It's the one that actually can be the most impacted through doing certain things. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So there are definitely risk factors. The number one risk factor for Alzheimer's is actually the older you get. And so we want to live older, though. We want to live longer. And so it's not really encouraging to think, well, if I live long enough, I will get Alzheimer's. Well, that's just not true. We all know people that have lived a very long life and they didn't develop Alzheimer's at all. So that is one of the risk factors, though. The older you get, the more chances you are developing Alzheimer's. APOE4, I'm going to go over that in a little bit. That is a very that is a factor that needs to be considered when dealing with Alzheimer's. But the biggest ones, the biggest reasons that we see people dealing with Alzheimer's is because of inflammation, and that can be caused by infections, diet, microbes, oral health, and we'll go into details about that. It can also be caused by deficiencies. A person might not have enough of something, so they might not have enough nutrients. They might not have enough hormones. They might not have enough oxygen. Even sleep can be a risk factor to developing Alzheimer's. Toxicity, that can be too much of something. When we think of toxicity, I think the first thing we think of are the toxins that are in our environment. And so, again, I'll talk about that. traumas. I think it's been very prevalent in what you see in the NFL. You hear a lot about people with chronic traumatic encephalitis, meaning they've been hit in the head so many times that their brain is inflamed and it's just never going to stop being inflamed because of those traumas. So traumas can definitely lead to dementia, but specifically can lead to Alzheimer's. And then there are vascular reasons why someone can develop Alzheimer's disease. But I think as we get talking about Alzheimer's, I think it's really important that we understand what Alzheimer's is. So I will leave that out to you guys. I'll put that question to you guys. Can anybody define what is happening to somebody that's got Alzheimer's? Like what's happening in their brain? Anybody feel confident in answering that question?
This is Catherine Pullen.
Hi, Catherine.
Oh, hi. My understanding has been that there are protein plaques of some kind that are built up on the brain that the body has some ability to eat that plaque away, but for some reason, your body is not properly performing that function.
Yeah. Yeah, and that for sure is what you tend to hear the most is that, and what you're talking about is probably amyloid plaques is probably what you've heard. Is that what you're referring to, Catherine?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep.
Yep. And then another term you'll hear is neurofibrillary tangles. And so what they talk about is you get these misfoldings of proteins in your brain, and they say that that can be the cause of Alzheimer's. And actually, as the research is being done, they're starting to see that that might not be the cause per se. And I'm going to go over that here in a minute. But yes, that's what most people think of. Or I think a lot of people kind of picture it very similar to like a degenerative process that's going on in your brain. Just like if you have an arthritis in a joint, you've got the brain is aging faster than it should, and it's deteriorating. And then that part of the brain for memory is being lost. And that's why people develop Alzheimer's as well. And those are kind of the two most common things that you'll see. And there is some truth to those, but there also is some things that I'm gonna clarify with those. So
can I ask you while you're on the risks, can I ask you about alcoholism, like really serious alcoholism? Can that be a risk factor?
For sure it can. I would say there's usually a like there is some underlying health issues that lead to alcoholism causing that. Where the brain gets impacted first, typically with alcoholism, is the person's cerebellum. And so that's why you see them lose balance and they really walk with a wide stance. But yes, it can, especially if they're predisposed to having that part of the brain get damaged. So alcohol definitely leads to that inflammation, and it can also create deficiencies in people because they can't absorb certain nutrients because of the alcohol, and then liver damage as well. So yeah, good point though. Alcohol can play a part, and so we'll talk about that as we continue to go. So this is the name of the book, The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen. Highly recommend reading it. And then if you find that, hey, I don't have a lot of time to read books, I tell people, hey, just go to the last 2 chapters, because he really talks about what it is you can do to find out if you're on that path to Alzheimer's and what you can do to take care of it as well. So like I said, I went through his whole protocol. It's called the RECODE protocol. And so I've been specially trained in that. And like I said, he's had some pretty amazing results with the patients he's been working with. So alluding back to what you had talked about, Catherine, is that a lot of times people think that amyloid plaques are the cause of Alzheimer's disease. And definitely if you do an autopsy on someone that's got Alzheimer's, you will see that they have amyloid plaques. And typically they start in the part of the brain called the temporal lobe, and specifically our hippocampus. And the hippocampus is where we create our memories. And so you will see these amyloid plaques. And so for many years, they thought, well, amyloid plaques are the cause, then the solution would be pretty simple. If we could just get rid of those amyloid plaques, then we can get rid of this person's Alzheimer's disease. So does anybody know of a drug on the market that's getting rid of amyloid plaques and helping patients with Alzheimer's disease? So, and the reason why, and some of it might be you're not sure if you want to answer or not, but there isn't any. In fact, what they found in the most recent study done in 2019 was they were finding like they had developed a drug that got rid of amyloid plaques, and they were actually making the patients worse. And so again, if you think about it, it's like that doesn't make a lot of sense that if amyloid plaques are the cause of the problem, just like if you looked at type 2 diabetes, if the cause of the problem is too much blood sugar, if we could lower their blood sugar, they would do better. And that is true. If you want to help a type 2 diabetic, you lower their blood sugar, they do better. If you want to help someone with Alzheimer's disease get better, getting rid of amyloid plaques actually makes them worse. And so there are a few drugs on the market right now that are out there for Alzheimer's patients, Aricept and Namenda. Does anybody know how those drugs even work then? Because they're not getting rid of amyloid plaques. Could anyone say how they do work?
No idea.
Yeah. I think most people.
Shouldn't you say you're the presenter, Aaron?
Yeah, I do know how they work, but I think that most people, including most doctors, know about the drug. That these are the two most common drugs given for Alzheimer's patients, but most people have no idea what they're doing. And I think that most people that I've ever talked to thought it was getting rid of those amyloid plaques because that's what causes Alzheimer's disease. Well, we make a neurotransmitter in our brain called acetylcholine. And acetylcholine can help us to create memories, okay? And so what happens is that just like an antidepressant, a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, what it does is it allows serotonin to stick around longer. Well, Aricept and Namenda, what they do is they allow acetylcholine to stick around longer in the brain, okay? But there's a big issue that you have with an Alzheimer's patient, and this is why I'm guessing some of you have seen some results with these two medications, but you haven't seen great results with these medications, especially when it comes to if you're trying to help them to retain memories, okay? And so you'll see other drugs used, more like antipsychotics and such, used in people with dementia and such, because you're more trying to treat the behavior issues that come with these dementias. But really, the problem you have with Aricept and Namenda is that keeping the acetylcholine around is great and everything, but if the part of the brain that it binds to is gone, then it's not going to do anything. And that's truly what's happening in Alzheimer's, is that brain, that hippocampus is actually shrinking and you're getting less and less cells that acetylcholine could even bind to. So you're going to see very limited results with Aricept and Namenda. And what you're also going to learn tonight is that there really is not just one cause of Alzheimer's disease. And because there's not just one cause of Alzheimer's disease, you cannot take a single approach to fix this problem. It'd be similar to if you decided, like, let's look at this house here. And so I think we could all agree that there's a lot of problems with this house, okay? And so let's say we hire a contractor and we say, hey, you got to do something to this house. You got to fix this house. And so he goes around, looks all around the house and comes back to you and tells you, you know what? Your house just needs a paint job. If you could paint this house, we could fix the problem. And so I think most of us would think, okay, I got the wrong contractor. This contractor is not going to be able to help me, because obviously you can see what the problem is. The problem is there's a foundation problem here, okay? Paint job might make the house look a little better, but it sure isn't going to fix the problem. And that's the same with Alzheimer's. If you give a drug to try to get them to make more or to not destroy their acetylcholine as fast, what you're going to see is a very limited result. And I think that anyone that works with with Alzheimer's patients would agree, yeah, we don't see great results with these two drugs, with these two medications, or maybe you see them at first, but as that disease progresses, it becomes much less effective because that part of the brain is just deteriorating. And so what they've actually found is that those amyloid plaques that we were talking about are actually trying to protect your brain. So they're actually doing something that we wouldn't have expected. And that's why what they're seeing is you give a person an amyloid plaque inhibitor, or it gets rid of amyloid plaques, they actually a lot of times get worse. So I don't know if you guys ever went to the show or watched the play Les Miserables. I'm sure Natalie's been there with me, but I'm sure she has no idea that she was there. She doesn't remember the names of movies. But I remember when they were being invaded and they were going to try to protect themselves. And so what they did was they went into their houses and they tore the doors down. They took tables out, the furniture, and they built this huge wall to keep the enemy out. And so that's a good thing, to keep the enemy out. But the problem was, that chair, that table, that door could no longer be used as a chair or a table anymore. It was now part of a wall. And that's what your body's doing, is actually when it forms those amyloid plaques, what it's trying to do is protect itself. It's trying to protect itself from an onslaught of things that are causing damage to the brain. And so it will literally sacrifice parts of its own brain to try to protect itself. And unfortunately, one of the first things it will do is it will use things that you don't need to have to be able to stay alive first. And so unfortunately, memories don't need to be there to keep you alive. And so that's the first thing that goes a lot of times. And so your body will literally sacrifice the less critical parts of the brain first, and then it'll eventually start moving to the more critical parts of the brain to try to protect itself. And eventually that's why you'll see someone die, is it'll start using parts of the brain that are for vital function, and then that person will eventually die from the disease. So think about those amyloid plaques not as the cause of Alzheimer's, but actually for part of the protection of Alzheimer's disease. And so when it comes to amyloid plaques, they're actually doing more research to find out how you can detect if someone has, are they forming those amyloid plaques? And they're starting to see that there are some tests that they can do to test someone's cerebral spinal fluid, but it is more for protection. Does anybody have any at this point, any questions regarding what we just talked about? All right, well, I'm going to keep going then. And then if you do have some questions, definitely you can unmute yourself and chime in. But so again, what are we protecting our brains from? It really is our modern world. And so if you look at certain groups of people, or if you look at rates of Alzheimer's disease, you're seeing Alzheimer's disease skyrocketing. You're seeing types of dementia and a lot of cognitive decline skyrocketing in our country. And the reason why is because of what's happening in our modern world. And so that's what we want to talk about next. And so really there's with Dr. Dale Bredesen's RECODE program, he talks about that there's 6 different types of Alzheimer's disease. The first one being inflammation. And I cannot stress this enough, is that so many diseases can be tied back to inflammation. You look at cancer, heart disease, even type 2 diabetes, these can all be related to inflammation. So inflammation is a very critical part of Alzheimer's, but the nicest thing about it is it's one of the things that you can impact the most. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But and then atrophic just means that your body's doesn't have the ability to produce certain hormones. And some of the biggest hormones when it comes to brain health would be thyroid hormone. And I don't think people realize this, that right now, there's about 5 million people in America that have been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, which is an autoimmune condition against the thyroid. And they estimate, so that's 5 million people. They estimate there's at least 30 million people in our country that have it. So that's 25 million people that that are walking around today that have Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism, and they have no idea that they have it. And some of the ways they know it is they have brain fog, unexplainable weight gain. They have their cold hands and feet. The outer thirds of their eyebrow are disappearing, and they're losing their hair. And they'll go to the doctor and tell them that, and the doctor will say, well, let's test your thyroid. They'll test your TSH, and the problem is TSH is a very not a very specific test. It's not a great test for testing someone with thyroid. It'll come back normal, and they'll say, well, and we've seen this many times in our office, is they'll come back and they'll say, the doctor said my thyroid's good, that I should just come back in a year and we'll test it again and see if it's gotten bad enough to the point where we can start treating this. And so, but there is a lot of things you can do to test further than just testing someone's TSH. Thyroid, estrogen is very protective of the brain. And as women age, their estrogen levels go down and becomes less usable. And so estrogen can be a problem. And then for men, testosterone can be a problem. And so low levels of those can definitely lead to dementia, and specifically Alzheimer's. Type 3 diabetes. I don't think a lot of people have heard of this before, but basically what it is insulin resistance in your brain. So you can't get, your brain uses glucose for fuel, and you can't get that glucose into your brain because the cells in your brain have become insulin resistant. Toxins, I think we all are aware that there's more toxins in this world than we've ever had. In fact, since the 1920s, we have over 80,000 new toxins, or new chemicals, I should say, in our world. And of those 80,000, very few of them have ever been tested on humans, and almost none of them have ever been tested in combinations. So you think of like aspartame, that's a new compound that wasn't around 100 years ago. And then you add it to something like plastic. What do those two things do together? We know that aspartame has, there are studies that show that it's harmful to our health. And so if aspartame is harmful to our health, and then we add it to plastic, which we know is harmful to our health, what happens? Well, think about where does that happen in our day-to-day life? People are drinking diet pop. They're getting exposed to it every day, and nobody really knows how toxic that really is. And so there's toxins that can cause Alzheimer's. And then vascular, not enough blood flow to parts of the brain. And then, like I had mentioned, different head traumas can lead to Alzheimer's disease. All right, but it really, if you think about it, if you want to boil it down to just two causes of pretty much all health issues in America, is you either have too much of something that's impacting your health, or you don't have enough of something. You're not enough nutrients, not enough sleep, not enough of your immune system to be able to fight off an infection. So the two big things that we want to look at is how can you impact your life so that you have less toxins, or there's less toxicities in your life, and making sure that you don't have deficiencies in your life. So either we don't have enough of something, or we got too much of something is really the big cause of pretty much everything that goes wrong with our bodies. So I'm just going to pause there. Any questions at this point? So hopefully this is that you guys are tracking with me and understanding that we can have deficiencies and then toxicities, but this is just an example of some of the things that we can be deficient in. Vitamin D, I think we've probably all heard of vitamin D, and really we've heard more about it than ever when it comes to COVID, because it really helps with our immune system. So we can have a deficiency in vitamin D that's going to impact how well our brain works. People don't really think about that because we were all taught that it was for bone health. That's what vitamin D is for. But vitamin D helps over 200 and some different chemical reactions happen in our bodies. So it really is important. B vitamins, especially B12. B12 is very important when it comes to neurologic function. Magnesium, essential fatty acids such as omega-3 fatty acids, CoQ10, copper, copper and zinc ratio, selenium, potassium. These are all vital nutrients that we need to have, and where we get them from is in our food. And I think we'd all agree that our food source has definitely been depleted in its nutrients. And then I had mentioned some of the hormones. We can have not enough thyroid hormone, not enough estrogen. We can actually have, probably for most people, it's too much cortisol. That's the stress hormone. And then not enough testosterone as well. Microbiome, that's our gut. We want to have a good, healthy gut. That's the bacteria that live in our, most of them live in our large intestine, but we want to have a good, healthy gut. Some of the major health issues that we see every day come into our office have to deal with gut health. And so we see that time and time again. And then toxicities. I think, how many are familiar with back in the 1980s that they said that we don't want to eat out of aluminum pots and drink out of aluminum cans? You guys remember that? And so what did they do then? What did they do to get rid of that aluminum? Can anybody tell me? Did they stop making aluminum cans? No, so they don't have aluminum cans. They still have them, but do you know what they did to them? Does anyone know? Nobody wants to take a guess? Well, they lined them all with plastic. So now you get exposure to constant plastic if you're drinking out of aluminum cans, eating out of aluminum cans. So they're lined with plastic. How about mercury? They told you, like, don't ever play with the thermometer that breaks. Yep, so you don't want to play with that because it's got mercury in it. Well, we can get exposed to mercury in drinking water. Unfortunately, a lot of the medications that people will take actually have mercury in them. And so same with arsenic, we can find that in groundwater. Cadmium, that's found in diesel or gas exhaust. So we can get exposed to that. Now we've got spring here, and so we want to get rid of these things that are growing in our yard called dandelions. So what do we use? We use glyphosate, or another word for that is Roundup. We got phthalates that are in our foods. We got VOCs that can outgas out of our carpet, out of our walls, paint off the walls. And we got polycarbonate chlorinated biphenyls, pesticides. So we got all these toxins in our world that can cause Alzheimer's.
I thought you said this was a presentation on hope.
Yes, so hopefully you guys feel that there's something you can do about that, though, and let's talk about that. So I had mentioned that probably one of the biggest things that you can do, focus on, is inflammation. And so things that can cause inflammation, again, I'll tell you just one last slide on all the bad things, and then we'll get to what you guys can be doing to help yourselves. But processed foods, I cannot stress enough how much processed foods can lead to inflammation in your body. Sugar, a leaky gut, that's where the permeability to your gut has been compromised, and things can get through your gut and into your body that should never get into your body. And then there's foods that we are actually taught that are healthy. For some people, they can cause major problems. Nightshade plants. If anyone's ever read the book Dr. Gundry wrote called The Plant Paradox, you'll learn more about how nightshade plants can lead to health issues. And some of the nightshade plants will be peppers, potatoes, tomatoes. And so those are what we'd all consider to be healthy foods, but yet for some people, they can cause major health issues. Grains, I think we're all familiar that gluten can be an issue, but glyphosate is a huge issue on grains. And so I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, we were back up in Canada, and my parents are grain farmers. And so I remember going with my mom, we're driving around the countryside, and we get to these peas, and looked like a nice crop, but she said, oh, we'll be able to harvest that crop in about a week or so. but yet it didn't look close to being ready to harvest. I'm like, well, how do you know that? Like, how is that going to happen in that much time, in that short of time? And she said, oh, we just sprayed it. So the technique now in farming is that you can spray your crops with glyphosate or Roundup, kill the plant, and what'll happen is then you can harvest it when you want to harvest it. And the other thing is, because the plant goes in kind of a protective mode, it plumps up the seed, and now you have a higher yield so that farmer can make more money. And so that is a technique, though, that is going to cause us to be exposed to even more Roundup. And then we've got herbicides and pesticides that are sprayed on the food that we eat. And then foods high in lectins, that actually comes back to some of the nightshade plants, but there's other foods that are high in lectins, like beans can be high in lectins. And again, some people can respond poorly. How many here have actually heard of the APOE4 gene?
Nope.
I've heard of it, but don't know much about it.
Yeah. So it's interesting because this here, if you have this gene, you can be anywhere between 50 to 80% more predisposed to developing Alzheimer's disease. So it's interesting how, especially if you do have someone that's like a family member that's got Alzheimer's, I would highly recommend that you spend, I looked up the costs to the lab that we go through. It's $59 to find out what your APOE status is. So we all have this gene called APOE. Now, some people will have it as APOE2, some people will have it as APOE3, and some people will have it as APOE4. And so, go ahead.
Does it relate to the like general Lewy body dementia too, or is it just Alzheimer's?
You know, good question, because Lewy bodies, you've got two processes going on. You're developing Parkinson's disease and you're developing Alzheimer's disease. They pretty much just associate it with Alzheimer's disease, but my guess is that there probably is an underlying in Lewy body as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and if you have one or two copies, that makes a big difference. So if you had one copy, you can be considered heterozygous. If you have two copies, you're considered homozygous. So the person that's homozygous, APOE4, meaning you got a copy of it from your mom and you got a copy of it from your dad, like I said, you're 50 to 80% more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. And the reason why is it actually is a protective gene that turns on inflammation in the body that's good for people that are constantly getting either injured or traumas to like their foot, or say back in the time when people didn't really have like nice shoes and stuff to be able to walk through fields or jungles. That APOE4 gene was actually very protective. But now when we live in a world where inflammation can be turned on just constantly, that APOE4 gene is actually a problem for people now. And so it's a genetic test. You basically just do a saliva test. You find out what your APOE4 status is. And the reason why you want to know that, again, it can be, again, kind of sound depressing, like, oh, if I find that out, that's going to be depressing because I'm kind of inevitable that I'm going to get Alzheimer's. But that's not at all why you'd want to know it. If you know you have it, you just have to, you understand that I have to live my life in a much stricter way than somebody else in order so I don't go down that path of Alzheimer's. And as unfun or whatever as that sounds, having that knowledge, though, it gives you the ability to do something now rather than waiting till you have this signs of Alzheimer's and say, oh, I wish I had known I could have done something. And that's why I highly recommend that everybody get their APOE status checked.
You'll tell us, will you be able to give us specifics on how to get that test?
Yep, absolutely. So just to allude to that right now, I think we're all familiar with like things like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. I think 23andMe, if you run their health protocol now, which is a more expensive version than the one they always advertise, they will give you your APOE status. Ancestry.com does not give it to you, but there's a lot of different companies out there that actually will do an APOE status for you. We go through a company called LabCorp, and we can order them, but people can also go onto LabCorp themselves and order that test without having to have a doctor order that. So,
And when you get the results back, then is your clinic or whatever able to help sort of decipher like what that means and what your action should be?
yeah, so we can help with, it's really easy as far as the response. They'll just tell you what, if you're homozygous, heterozygous, they'll tell you your APO or your APOE 2 or 3 or 2/3. So they'll tell you what it is. And then we can help a person for sure. And I'll get into that in a couple of minutes on helping them to navigate, like what should you do personally to work on preventing that from leading into Alzheimer's. And
Thank
so inflammation, infections can cause inflammation. So we will do blood labs to test to see if someone has signs of infections, like chronic infections in their body. So when you look at inflammation, it just plays such a key part in so many health issues that if you had just addressed inflammation, you can go down a path of not developing cancer, heart disease, so many other illnesses, that this is where I tell people where I would definitely start. So who could tell me, so this one, you guys, someone's got to answer this because it's multiple choice. So what is one of the first signs of Alzheimer's disease? Is it loss of hearing? Is it loss of memory, loss of taste, or loss of smell?
Memory.
Okay, so anybody say anything different than memory?
Hearing.
Hearing? Anybody else?
Smell.
Smell? All right, anybody going for taste? All right, so most people would say loss of memory because that's what we see with Alzheimer's, but actually the first test you can do is you can test to see if someone's losing their sense of smell. And so they did a study in Florida, at the University of Florida, where they did the peanut butter test. And so I think we could all agree that when someone opens peanut butter in a kitchen, we could smell it from across the room. But people that are developing Alzheimer's, and I'm not sure why peanut butter exactly, but they literally can bring it close to their nose. But if they can bring it in 7 inches or less without them smelling it, they are much more likely on that path to Alzheimer's disease. And so the reason why that's an issue, or why that happens, is because the nucleus for the sense of smell is in your temporal lobe. And so your temporal lobe is being impacted specifically for Alzheimer's, your hippocampus, and it's also impacting your sense of smell. So there's actually, you can go online and you can find that they have these scratch and sniff tests, and you can test your smell on a regular basis just to see if you might go down that path. So, anyone have a question?
Or I had. Oh, yeah.
Did you have a question?
Sense of smell before this all happened. Like I could.
All right. All right. So kind of a interesting fact, because like, how much do you think that test costs? We're talking pennies to already have an idea of what's happening with your brain status. And it's going to happen years before you develop memory loss. Okay, so what I want to spend the rest of the tonight talking about is, where do you start? Because it can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of different ways we can take care of our health. And I think it's really important that we do address all those areas. But like I had mentioned, I think one of the first places I would start would be how to deal with inflammation. But I think even before that, it's really important that you start looking at where are you at, like as far as some of the testing you can do. And so I'm not going to go into great detail with all of these tests. Do you have, what I'd like to get from everybody is your email address, and I could send you guys this slide, because, and I'm also recording this so you'll be able to watch this again. But we already talked about the APOE4. You also can do a thing called methylation. That's going to see how well you're using your B vitamins, which is a huge thing. We see that in our office constantly. We have a supplement in our office called Max B that gives you methylated B vitamins. And that stuff is like, I hate to say it's like crack in our office. is people, when they take it and they have a methylation problem and they start taking that, it's like a light switch just got turned on in their life. And so methylated B vitamins can play a huge role in people's health. When you're doing blood labs, you want to know inflammatory markers like CRP, homocysteine. I already talked about the methylation profile. You can also see how well you're doing with your essential fatty acids, meaning there's omega-3s and there's omega-6s. Omega-3s, good. Omega-6s cause inflammation. So you can actually see that ratio and see where you're at with it. Testing your blood sugar, but you never just want to look at your glucose. You also want to look at your hemoglobin A1C, which tells you how your blood sugar is over the last 120 days. But then also looking at your insulin levels is actually a much better test, because if your blood sugar is high, but you can pump out a lot of insulin and keep your blood sugar within the normal range, it'll look like it'll be a false test that shows that your blood sugar is just fine, but you're pumping out 10 times more insulin to get it to look that way. So you can actually measure someone's insulin level. And I don't know why doctors just don't order this all the time, but you should measure your fasting insulin levels, because that will give you a much better picture on whether you're developing insulin resistance, which is a huge problem. Like I said, you can have insulin resistance in your brain, and then you don't get fuel to your brain. You can do a lipid panel. I think we've all heard that LDL is like the bad cholesterol, but there's different types of LDL cholesterol that are worse. And the worst ones are oxidized LDL and then your VLDL. And most doctors don't ever run either one of those tests. And so you want to get that added. Vitamin D, I see a lot of people come in that either didn't get their vitamin D levels checked, or when they did, and I'm talking like end of summer, people in the teens. And some of it is because we're not getting enough sun exposure. Some of it is because we're not very good at processing fats, and vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. And then the other thing is, when you convert vitamin D from your sun, you also have to take it through your liver and your kidney. And most people, their liver and their kidneys are not functioning optimally. And so their vitamin D levels are low. And so they need to take higher levels of vitamin D. But if they were to support their kidneys and their liver, they would actually need to take less vitamin D. And the vitamin D from the sun would be more effective. Glutathione is just, it's an antioxidant that our body produces, but you can take it as a supplement too. But when you look at glutathione, you can actually go get IV therapy of glutathione, and you'll see people with Parkinson's, they get glutathione, their Parkinson's will go away. It'll only last a couple of days, but that's how powerful that glutathione can be. Adrenal stress index, most people are stressed in this world, so an adrenal stress index can help find out how well your adrenal glands are working. You can test to see how well your microbiome, like your gut health, is. You can do an MRI that measures the size of your hippocampus. You can get your thyroid tested. Like I mentioned, TSH is not enough. You need to know what your thyroid's putting out. So you want to get your T4, your total T3 tested. You want to get your free T4 and free T3. And again, that's not standard. So you have to go to a doctor that's willing to do that. In testing hormones, you can do heavy metal testing, and you can also do Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which just does a test. So as I read these all to you, I'm guessing one of the things you're running through your head is, okay, that's going to cost me a fortune. So, which it would. If you ran all those tests, you'd be looking at thousands of dollars of testing. Now, that being said, to stay 1 month at Truvai is thousands of dollars. So if you could stay, healthy and stay out of it just even 1 month, you paid for your test. I say that jokingly, but This is where I think someone had asked, like, okay, could someone help me navigate this? Because I see this a lot. People think, well, I'll just go get that all. And then they'll dump $3,000-4,000 into the testing. Then they don't have the money to even go see a doctor because they've spent all their money on testing. And they don't even have, and most doctors can't navigate like, what do you do with the information? And that's definitely where I'm highly trained in. Is first and foremost, I would help a person to know which tests they should even run to begin with, and then help them with those results, because you don't want to spend, you know, thousands of dollars on tests, not know what they mean, and to run tests you didn't even need to run. And so these are critical tests, but going to a practitioner can really guide and direct you to know which tests you should do. So really, you want to make the changes. So without even doing those tests, I think a lot of us can do a lot of things before we even run those tests. And so some of them would be looking at a diet. I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with a ketogenic diet or a modified ketogenic diet. Ketogenic diet just means that 90%, or sorry, 75 to even up to 90% of your calories are coming strictly from fat. And that's a lot. And so I would say that if you're in a state of Alzheimer's, that might be that's probably a diet that you actually would want to eat. And it actually works well for Parkinson's patients too. And it works well for epileptics. But most people that don't have Alzheimer's and just trying to prevent it, they'd want to do more of a modified ketogenic. And what that means is they're eating about 30 to 50% of their calories are coming from fat. The rest are coming from about 30 to 40% carbohydrates. And then you're looking at, and carbohydrates that have high fiber. And so, and then you're looking at about 20% coming from protein, okay? And so that's what a ketogenic diet is. Any questions about a ketogenic diet? Cool, I'm gonna move on to gluten. Gluten, it plays a huge part in a lot of health issues. One of the things it can do, I mentioned, it can cause a leaky gut. So, and most people that have a leaky gut don't know that they have a leaky gut. So you want to, most people should probably avoid gluten, or at least minimize it. Some of it is because it's covered with like herbicides and pesticides, or even glyphosate, which is again Roundup. But then gluten itself can cause a lot of problems for people. So I would say, especially if you're APOE4, you would cut this gluten out of your diet completely. You would do a modified ketogenic diet, and then you do a keto flex diet where you would eat only in a 12-hour window, or you would fast for 12 hours. So meaning you would stop eating, say at 6 o'clock at night, and then you wouldn't eat again until 6 in the morning. But if you're APOE4, you'd probably want to do like 16 hours of not eating. Okay, so a lot of people call that intermittent fasting, if you guys have heard of that before. And then you want to make sure that you stop eating about 3 hours before you go to bed, because you don't want your body digesting food when you're sleeping. You want your body focused on repairing itself. When we're sleeping, there's a thing that happens in our brain called autophagy. And so we want to allow your energy to go to that, not to digestion, okay? So that is why I would say gluten should be cut out. I'm not going to go into any of the details of all these supplements, but again, if you look at this whole list of supplements, you could look at, man, I'm going to spend thousands of dollars on supplements every month if this is what I'm going to have to do. And so again, this is why it's absolutely critical to work with a practitioner in helping you to figure out which ones you need, because you don't want to be taking supplements that you don't need. That's just a big waste of money. And so so I won't go into details about them, but when we meet with patients, we really help them to figure out which supplements they should take and which ones they won't need. And again, we'll make sure you guys get this slide so you can see all the different supplements that help with brain health. And then what we'll do is we've recorded this, so we'll put this up so you can watch this again and see that slide again that way. All right, so the other thing, well, any questions when it comes to nutrition, which would be diet and supplementation? Okay, so we're gonna move on to detoxify your body, detoxify your house, and detoxify your work. Your work is you're gonna have the least amount of control over, but your body for sure. So some of the things that you wanna do to reduce your exposure to toxins on your body. Women, you guys put makeup on your body. Make sure that the makeup you're buying doesn't have all these heavy metals and chemicals in them. So buying, what's the name of that? Some of the more natural ones.
Yeah, beauty.
Beauty counter, and then I'm sure there's Melaleuca has ones, and I'm sure there's lots of other companies that have natural products like that. So highly recommend that. Deodorants versus antiperspirants. Antiperspirants use aluminum to stop you from sweating. Sweating allows you to cool your body off, but it also allows you to detoxify. So you don't want to use antiperspirants because that stops your body from getting rid of chemicals, and it uses a chemical to do so. Your cleaning supplies, like your laundry soaps, not using dryer sheets. Dryer sheets are some of the worst like toxins that you can put in your household or put on your body. And the reason why you're putting it on your body is it covers your clothes and then you wear it all day long. And that's the same with dry cleaning. So that's what, when it comes to detoxifying your body, your house, like I mentioned, cleaning supplies, your air in your house, the water that you drink, EMFs, that's just electromagnetic fields. So your Wi-Fi in your house, that can play a huge part in some people's health. So I think some people can really relate to that. They can actually feel EMFs, even your pots and pans. So again, what they did was when they said you couldn't eat off of aluminum pots and pans, they sprayed them all with Teflon, and Teflon can be harmful to our bodies too. So you really rather use stainless steel or cast iron pots and pans to cook with. With work, like I said, you don't have a lot of choices in the matter because maybe the people cleaning your office or your workspace is using chemicals and such, but try to limit that as much as you possibly can. So you want to detoxify your body. These are some of the most common toxins that we'll find in our environment and in our households. So heavy metals in our environment, such as arsenic, mercury, aluminum, those are things that really can cause damage to a brain. And then our households as well. And again, you'll be able to go back and take a look at this slide. How many have plants in their house? I grew up that everywhere you went, and maybe this is just our house or not, I don't know. We kill every plant that comes into our house. So I don't know if you guys have plants, but you used to, when I was a kid, I remember you couldn't go to a house that didn't have all kinds of different plants. Well, plants can actually help get rid of some of these toxins that are in our air, the things that gas out, and those plants can do a great job of filtering that. The one plant I always remember though was that we always had an aloe vera plant. So if you cut yourself, you would be able to heal yourself with the aloe vera plant. So
Does that get rid of toxins?
no, I don't have that on there. It's not, but it does help with. So these are just some of the foods that you can eat that would help you to detoxify different organs in your body. And so the food we eat can truly be the medicine to help our bodies. And then sleep. This is a huge issue in America. I don't know how many of you guys know people that have sleep apnea, but there's an enormous amount of people using CPAP machines now because they're literally stopping breathing when they're sleeping. And there's can be a lot of different reasons why that is. It's good to figure out what that is. And if you can get rid of that, great. If you can't get rid of that sleep apnea, a CPAP machine is an absolute must, because if you can't sleep, you can't heal your body, and you can't do that autophagy when you're sleeping, where your body's cleaning out the brain and allowing it to heal. Some of the reasons why people would have a hard time falling asleep is they might be stressed. They do their work right before they go to bed. And so I'm saying that to Natalie because she always does that. And then you're thinking about your work or your stress. You start thinking about things. You watch the news. You read something, read the newspaper. That can cause you to get stressed, and then you have a hard time falling asleep. Some people have a flipped cortisol, and that's what that adrenal stress index test that I mentioned does. Looking to see if your cortisol is high at nighttime when it should be high in the morning. Trouble staying asleep. Some of the reasons people have a hard time staying asleep is blood sugar. That's a huge one. If they're used to eating every 3 to 4 hours, they sleep for about 4 to 5 hours. They run out of fuel, especially for their brain, and then it'll wake them up. And if you're like those people that have that, you'll be awake and you'll be up for about an hour to an hour and a half, just staring at the ceiling, wondering like, why am I awake? You're super wide awake. It's like it's morning time and you can't figure out why you're awake. And then you finally do fall asleep, and then you wake up way more tired than you were at 3 in the morning when you first woke up. And then people that wake up tired, like I said, they could have a flipped cortisol. So their cortisol levels are super low.
Oh, yes, actually, yes, please.
Is there a question? Any questions about sleep or detoxifying or?
I have a question about all the hype around CBD oil in the context of Alzheimer's. Is it good, bad, and different? Not known yet.
Yeah, no, good question. I would say CBD oil is really good for helping reducing inflammation. And so I would say that it can be good. What we have noticed in some people is it's very individualized, meaning that we've had some people take CBD oil and we can see huge changes, especially by looking at their blood markers. And we've seen people take CBD oil and absolutely no benefit whatsoever. It can also help with pain levels, but that's typically not going to be that much related to Alzheimer's disease. More than anything, it's how it can help with inflammation.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good question though. All right, this is a huge one that most people don't think of. We think of nutrients, we think of food, we think of supplements, we think of sugar, but oxygen, it plays a huge part in your brain because your brain uses about 30% of the oxygen that you take in. So you will have problems then if you're what we call a shallow breather or chest breather, where someone tells you to take a deep breath in, it all comes from your chest. Diaphragmatic breathing is really the way it should be. So there's breathing exercises a person can do where a person takes 3 seconds to breathe in, hold it for 3 seconds, breathe out for 3 seconds, or you can modify that. So there's lots of ways that we can help with our oxygen levels. But some of the biggest ones is you just never want to be anemic. And again, when it comes to blood labs, I find that so many people get inadequate blood labs and they don't know that they're actually anemic. And anemic would be you don't have enough hemoglobin to carry the oxygen to the places that it needs to be. And so that's one of the big ones that we see. Another one that we see is poor circulation. So people have either too much high blood pressure, body weight can impact how good our circulation is, and then thyroid hormone can really impact our circulation. So if we're not getting oxygen to our hands and feet, or if our feet and hands are cold all the time, that's because your extremities aren't getting enough circulation. Well, unfortunately, your brain's probably not getting enough oxygen as well. In our office, we use oxygen concentrators to help people to heal from brain injuries like concussions. And we also use hyperbaric chambers in our office to help people to get more oxygen to their cells, because that helps your brain and the rest of your body to heal. So think of oxygen as a vital nutrient. I mean, we can only live minutes without oxygen. So it's really important that we have oxygen. And then stress, how do you deal with stress? I think most Americans probably take the wrong approach. We try to caffeinate it, we try to avoid it. Instead of dealing with it through, we can deal with it through meditating on the word. We can have faith, so through our prayer, memorizing scripture, reading the Bible. Exercise can help with stress. Stretching can help us with stress. Even music can help us to de-stress. And there's probably other things that we can do, but like I said, I think as Americans, we probably are the worst at handling our stress. They say that if you have stress, chronic stress, and that they define that as anything more than 3 months. They did a study on this of dealing with the same stressor, and I think all of us can agree that we've probably all been dealing with the same stressor for over a year now. That stress puts you in the same risk factors as if you were smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. And so that's how impactful stress is. And stress causes us to release a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol, some people call it like it causes your hippocampus. It causes like Swiss cheese type of damage to your hippocampus. And again, the hippocampus is the part of the brain where we create our memories. And so stress is that powerful and that damaging to our bodies. So we really want to handle the stress that we're dealing with in our lives. And so, like I said, there's some great examples of how to deal with your stress. And then we want to exercise, exercising through our body, but also doing brain exercises. So the best exercises that have ever been shown to help with Alzheimer's is high intensity interval training. And the nice thing about this type of working out is it gets your heart rate up, but you can do a really intense workout in 20 minutes and in a day. So I think most of us can find 20 minutes in a day to exercise. And so high intensity interval training, that's where you work out really hard for like 30, 40 seconds, and then you rest for 10 to 20 seconds, and then you do it again, and maybe you do that for 20 minutes straight. Or if you like we did Christmas Day, we did 25 exercises to celebrate Christmas. So yeah, Natalie loves my holidays, because I always got some kind of workout that we have to do. All right. Lumosity, if you guys are familiar with some of the brain exercise places, Lumosity is one of them, and Brain HQ. Those are probably the two big ones. They have you do little exercises that work all the different parts of the brain. So it's just a really good way to work out the brain. So you can do those on a daily basis. It's a monthly fee subscription to do it. But really fun exercises actually. All right, so as far as all the different things that a person can do, you can see that, again, there can be a lot of different things, but I think that the biggest thing we want to look at is, well, where do you go from here? Because it can be very overwhelming, right? You saw all the different tests, you saw all the ways you can take supplements and different ways to eat and exercise and such, but I think the first thing a person needs to do is understand that you really, I don't know if anyone here has ever run a race before, but I always ask this question to people: what's the easiest part of a race? And I'll just answer what I think is the answer to that is probably either the start or the finish. I would definitely say that the hardest part of a race is when you're in the middle of that race, especially if you're running a long race. I remember running half marathons, and at the start you got all these people cheering for you, at the end you got all these people cheering for you, but as you get in the middle you get a lot less people cheering for you, and you get to parts where they're not even cheering for you, there's not even anyone there. And I think that's the thing when it comes to dealing with health, is that a lot of people, what happens is they start something and then it gets hard, and guaranteed the stuff that I presented tonight, it's not easy. It's not easy to eat right. It's not easy to exercise. It's not easy to make sure you're not you're avoiding toxins and such. But I would say this, that pushing through can be hard if you're trying to do it on your own. And I think that's why when you look at some of these things, like Natalie does, faster rate of fat loss. There's people that do different programs. that having people come alongside you to help you or to push you, to encourage you is important. And I think when it comes to dealing with trying to prevent Alzheimer's and trying to not go down that same path that maybe a loved one has gone down, is that I think it's really important that you have someone to come alongside you that really can help you with that and really understands it. A good healthcare practitioner, myself, I can help put you on a good path. And then in our office, we actually have a health coach that can come alongside you and then help you to accomplish that so that you can actually finish the race. And finish the race strong and finish it the way you'd like to, because I don't know too many people that, I think most of us would agree we'd love to die of old age, our bodies working the way they're supposed to, our brain working the way they're supposed to. We have one event late in our lives, and that's how we end our lives, and that's it. Most people don't want to spend the last 20, 30 years of their life dealing with a chronic health condition, and especially when it comes to Alzheimer's, not even knowing who they are or who the people that they love are around them. And so I think it's really important that you have that person, that practitioner, come alongside you to put you on that right path, and to have someone like a health coach come alongside you to help stick to that path. So that's all I have for presenting tonight. I think I went a few minutes over, but I'd love to answer any questions that you guys have.
So this is Catherine again. I loved this. It was great timing because it's so on my mind about trying to figure out like what's my journey towards, what my dad's going through, and and just wishing like crazy that there would be some way to get some kind of indicators to know, like, where am I headed or what's my likelihood, all that. So what is the name of your facility or your place that your practice?
Yep. So the name of the office is Vallejo Health and Wellness Center, and we are located in Eden Prairie. And so when we send out, because did we get anyone's email addresses?
I'm sure if I look at know who's.
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll send out some information about the office, and then like what would be a good next step as far as setting up an appointment and finding that out. We'll have that in there in that email when I send out the slides as well. And so that would be, Catherine, a great place to start. I also highly recommend, spending some time. You can read Dr. Bredesen's book, but I also think if you found like a 1-hour video on YouTube, you'd learn pretty much most of what you'd learn from the book, except for the last couple of chapters where he talks about the different testing and supplements. But that's what I have in this presentation. So that's another great place to go, though, is to listen to Dr. Dale Bredesen as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
Yeah, what did you say ruins the hippocampus?
Yeah, so a lot of things, but I think the one you're alluding to, Jane, is that your cortisol, and that's the stress hormone that in a lot of people, when we're stressed, it's really high, and it causes a lot of damage to the hippocampus. And estrogen in women protects the hippocampus, and it does in men too, but so does testosterone. And so cortisol, really bad for the brain, estrogen, really good for the brain. And so obviously there's a fine line there, because they know that when they were doing hormone replacement therapy, that they were causing heart disease by giving women artificial estrogen. But if your body's supposed to produce its own, and if it is, then it can protect your brain. Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
So any other questions you guys have?
Hey, Doc, I was going to ask you, what do you recommend for people that have that lovely up at 3:30 a.m. deal?
Yep, and I've had that before. The other thing that it came with was some nice night sweats. I don't know if that's something people can relate to as well, where you're just soaking the bed because you're sweating so badly. So the first thing is figuring out if it is blood sugar. Okay, highly, and for myself, where I found that it really was helpful was I started doing intermittent fasting, stopped eating through more than 3 hours before I went to bed. And then I started doing more of a ketogenic slant. I wasn't measuring my ketones. If people don't know what that means, is we can burn sugar for fuel, or we can burn ketones for fuel. And you can actually use a glucose monitor that's also a ketone monitor to measure your ketones. And so I started eating a lot more fat, and that really helped. And then doing that intermittent fasting, where I would not eat after 6, but then I stopped eating. I wouldn't eat until almost noon. And for someone like myself, now they can really testify to this. I used to have to eat like the second I woke up, and I get up early, so I'd be eating at 5 in the morning. Like the second I woke up, I couldn't go another minute without eating. And so now if I wanted to, I don't do it that way anymore because my blood sugar is now normalized. But if I wanted, I could go till noon without eating. And so it's not, if you're familiar with the Snickers commercials, you're not yourself when you're hungry. If you have symptoms like that, you're going through hypoglycemia and you have blood sugar issues, and that will typically flip over to hyperglycemia. And so those are the things that I did, and that's definitely what we recommend for our patients. It's not the only reason someone will wake up in the middle of the night, though. Another reason people wake up in the middle of the night is if their gallbladder, every night our gallbladder is supposed to dump out what's in it so that it can make new bile for the next day. People that have a sluggish gallbladder, that will wake them up in the middle of the night. So sometimes we have to give people gallbladder support. The best 2 things for gallbladder support: milk thistle and dandelion root. So some people, we just tell them, hey, try some dandelion tea before bed and see if that makes a difference. And so hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you.
What about drinking alcohol before bed?
Yep, that helps you get rid of all that stress. I'm just kidding. So a lot of times it helps people to fall asleep, but they won't stay asleep because it's not a great, it's definitely not a sleep aid. And most people are probably drinking too many of those drinks before bed. But even like a glass of wine, you would want to reserve that to like 3 hours before you go to bed, because you still have to process alcohol and you don't want to be doing that while you're sleeping.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
What about those of us who've had our gallbladders removed?
Yep. So with gallbladders that are removed, you're not going to have that gallbladder dump. So you probably, that wouldn't be the thing that would wake you up in the middle of the night if you are waking up in the middle of the night. But you'd want to do a lot of stuff to support your liver, because now your body has to produce bile on demand. So every time you eat a fatty meal, you're going to have to create bile from your liver. And so as long as you have a good, strong liver, that can happen. A lot of us have stressed livers because of the amount of toxins that are in our world, and the foods that we're eating can lead to more of a fatty liver. And so again, supporting the liver through dandelion and milk thistle are really good things. And then what we suggest is, if you don't have a gallbladder and you're going to eat a fatty meal, you could take exogenous or external bile. So ox bile, you can buy bile supplements, bile salts is what they're called. And then, like I said, when you're eating a fatty meal, you can take those with your meal, and that will help you to digest that fat better. So did that answer your question, Melissa?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, like I said, what we're going to do is we'll send out an email that'll have the office information on it, so you guys can know where to go and just like what next steps, if you're wanting to take it to the point where you want to meet with a practitioner to help you and guide you and direct you. Again, if you're finding like, hey, I feel like I'm doing great, but I just want to be on that right path, then I would just suggest looking at those slides again, looking at some of the foods that I recommend, the supplements. Read Dr. Dale Bredesen's book, at least the last couple of chapters, and really just spend time looking at things like on YouTube and such that help you to reduce inflammation. Because I think when you look at those 6 types of Alzheimer's, the number one cause will be the one that's inflammation, and inflammation will lead to some of those other ones. It will lead to decreased hormones. It will lead to other health issues like even toxicities if you're not eating properly. So I would highly recommend looking at that. But again, if you need help, we'll send out information about our office. You can learn more about our office.
And you have a blog.
Yep, and
you have a
so,
blog
yep,
and
our
yeah,
website has a blog
education.
where we're always teaching people how to take care of themselves. We have a YouTube channel. We'll put those in that link. And you can, on our YouTube channel, we have all kinds of videos on helping people to deal with like things like Alzheimer's, but then also just things that you can do to stay healthy. And we actually are releasing a whole series on Alzheimer's where we talk about each type specifically and talk about specifically what you can do for each type of Alzheimer's.
And those are free.
Yes, they're free. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, like I said, we have a passion for health. Natalie and I do. We both saw family members go through Alzheimer's, but I've seen people go through all kinds of other health issues, and we have a passion to see people not have to go through those health issues. So our vision, our mission is to get information out to people that would help them to take good care of their bodies, be as healthy as they possibly can, because we believe people, every one of us is put on this earth for a purpose, and we want to help you to be able to serve out that purpose. Well, thanks everyone for joining tonight, and I'm sure we'll do another Zoom call in the future on. So I would recommend just let Natalie know if you're associated with Truvai, let Natalie know what topics you'd love to hear us talk about, and we'd love to talk more about what you guys want to hear from us.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Have a great rest of your night. Thank you.
you.
Thank you.